Ani, bonjour. Welcome to part 2 of our Get Out the Vote live stream. My name is Neely Bardwell, and I am the political editor for Native News Online. We're excited to have you guys join us as we dive into the importance of exercising your right to vote. With crucial elections just around the corner, your voice matters now more than ever. And so we've been covering the election, talking to voters across Indian country, and the biggest thing we have heard is the need for a sovereignty ticket. And I am joined today with our co-host, Marlon White Eagle. Marlon, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, the sovereignty ticket, that's really what's on the line for Indian country. That's as a former tribal leader, it's been learning. Each election cycle, we meet a new candidate. If it happens to be a new candidate, and then the education process starts all over, where we talk about uh, sovereignty, the nation to nation relationship, and different treaty obligations. So it's always a learning curve, and it always seems like it's always an attack on tribal sovereignty when we end up, you know, in a courtroom to fight for our rights, to maintain our rights, really.
Right, and in June we acknowledged the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act, which is also known as the Snyder Act, which supposedly granted Native people the right to vote. But even with the act, it took some states until the 1950s to allow Natives the right to vote, and so we have only had our right, quote unquote, to vote in these elections, and so it is really special. That we have, a platform to get our voice out there and have our issues heard. And so, Marlon, you've been covering a little bit of the election coverage, and I know you recently went to another rally. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we get started?
Oh yeah, definitely. The rally that I went to is with Barack Obama, and he's obviously campaigning for the Harris Walls ticket, and he had some really good points in there. He kind of basically nullified, the Trump campaign. You know, Obviously the economy is one of the strong tickets. He talked about the economy nostalgia that people have for the Trump ticket, the Trump administration, and he kind of hit it pretty hard that he had 75 months of job growth, and he had one of the of course he had 2 terms, 8 years in office, and the economy was going really, really well during that Obama administration. And the way he framed it, it was, he fixed the mess that Republicans had left behind. President Obama, he's just so inspirational. It took me at least a day or two you know, to wrap my head around all of what he was. I think he inspired a lot of people at that rally.
Well, there's definitely a lot of big issues on the ballot this year, especially when it comes to deciding who we want to represent our country. And so, in this two-part series, we'll be discussing how Native communities can make an impact, the important work being done on the ground, and everything you need to know to prepare for Election Day. And if you missed part 1, we do encourage you to go back and watch it if you have the time. The direct link will be posted in the comments of the stream. And so first, we do want to thank our sponsors before we get into our first panel.
Chi-miigwech, and thank you to the MacArthur Foundation, Four Directions, and the National Congress of American Indians for your support. This live stream would not be possible without you.
And for our next panel, we will talk to Shaun Griswold, a journalist based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and is from Laguna, Jemez, and Zuni Pueblos. Hi, Shaun. How are you?
I'm doing well, Neely. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell me a little bit about the podcast that you and us at Native News Online have been kind of working on for the last couple weeks?
Yeah, the Native Vote, Native Voice podcast is something that we started working on over the past couple of weeks, and we're focused primarily on how the Native vote's going to impact swing states and on the impact of the Native vote on the electoral map. So we're looking in our very first episode that aired and published last week. We took a look at Michigan and trying to understand how the Great Lakes region is going to be, is a very substantial place for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to win, and the impact that the Native vote can have while being a small population in the state has an actually very large influence on the electoral politics. We talked to an elected leader from Sault Ste. Marie tribe out there in Michigan, Aaron Payment, who broke it down to us by saying that the margin of errors in polling in these swing states, not just Michigan, but also Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, that the margin of error between the two presidential candidates is at a point that the percentage of the Native American population in those states can and will likely swing the election. This is something that we saw really heavily in 2020. There's been a lot of press and proclamations that just, show how impactful the Native vote was to providing Joe Biden a victory in Arizona as a particular swing state. So not only is there momentum building off of that in places like Arizona, plus the Great Lakes, but also how do you get Natives involved and also protect the right to vote? A lot of the people that we're talking with are nonpartisan groups. While they may have political ideas personally, they're really referencing the fact that it's just important for Native people to vote, to get them access to the polls, to get them the proper information about what type of ID is acceptable if their state requires ID. When we looked at Michigan, tribal IDs are allowed. So that's something that tribal citizens in that state had to fight for and get through the legislature. We talk a little bit about that. And what it does is it really does just impact not only in the small state of, and not the small state, but in the one state of Michigan, how that sort of is translating to all those other swing states. And so for our next episode this week, that's going to be publishing tomorrow. It'll be available for people to listen. We're taking a look at Arizona. We were actually going to do Wisconsin, but because of the news that happened in Arizona over the past week with President Biden visiting Gila River and issuing an apology for the federal Indian boarding school era, plus Minnesota governor and vice presidential candidate Tim Walz visiting Window Rock, Arizona, the capital of the Navajo Nation. We just had to move the news over to Arizona. On top of that, we also talked to congressional candidate Jonathan Nez, the former Navajo Nation president, who's at a basically 50-50 split to become the first Native American elected official of Congress in that state. We talked to Nez over the weekend, and he's excited. He thinks that the amount of Native people that are going to be coming in his district will not only get him to Congress, but also tilt the race for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So that's what's coming up. Excuse me. Yeah.
That's really exciting, and I am happy to be a part of some of the interviews, kind of talking about the things that I've experienced, throughout this election season. But can you tell us a little bit about what happened this weekend and why we, moved Arizona up on the schedule?
Yeah, so it started earlier in the week, last week, when we caught wind that President Biden would be issuing an apology with for the United States role in creating the federal Indian boarding school policies that was an attempt to eradicate culture, language, and another form of genocide. It's caused generational trauma. It has caused a loss of culture, and it did a lot of what it was intended to do. But what was substantial in Biden's apology is it does reflect and honor the sins, which is the word he used, of this country and how it brutalized and made victims of Native people in those spaces. But what was also substantial in there was Secretary Deb Haaland, who's also from Laguna Pueblo, who was Biden's interior cabinet member. Elections matter. None of this wouldn't have happened if Biden didn't win 2020, appoint Haaland, and then her lead this investigation into the boarding school era. She made a very clear remark that the U.S. government failed in its attempt to eradicate Native culture, Native history. And now we're here in 2024 talking about how Natives could be responsible for putting the next president in the White House for the second election in a row. So I think that was substantial there. It not only shows a promise and a dedication and an acknowledgement from the federal government, but it also puts in place where Native Americans are in our current history, not only as Native people, but in our role in the United States and the function of this democracy, which we are being targeted now and being told to help protect.
Right. And you attended the apology in person, right?
Yeah, I was in Phoenix. Yeah, I went up to Gila River. It was at a K-8 school for the tribe, which when we're talking about boarding schools and the horrible environment that those created, to come into a place that is a revitalization of the education model that's run by the tribe, that has traditional language programs, that has a gardening club where they're teaching students how to farm in their traditional homelands, a very dry, high state. And then also to the fact of songs, prayers, the way students were dressed, it's fully indigenous. And to see this thing come full circle around from the boarding school era to what this school is every single day and will continue to be, was substantial to be there. Plus, felt like almost every tribal leader in the nation happened to be there. And all of us accepting and taking in what is happening in front of us. It was a very emotional day for a number of reasons for a lot of people.
I agree. And so I obviously a lot of different people are having very mixed emotions about the apology and very different thoughts about what it means and where it's coming from. And obviously the authenticity of it is always something that's always in question. And so what do you think for the most part, um, what do you feel that Indian country thinks about this apology when through the conversations that you've been having and through the overall energy of the event?
Yeah, there is a very cynical viewpoint that this apology's timeliness happening a couple days before the election in the middle of voting, as early voting happens in Arizona, in a swing state that Biden knows Democrats need in order to win. There is some cynicism and skepticism that this is just that. It's a campaign stop. Well, it was an official event by the White House. It's completely not lost on anybody that this is also something that if it's going to continue, the apology is just one of the items on the list of what needs to be done to rectify this boarding school era. Um, it wasn't lost on anybody in the audience that the Democrats and Biden was positioning Harris's administration or potential Harris administration as being the one to continue the path forward on providing justice for the boarding school era, which could include a national monument, which could include, investments in child welfare for Native kids, language revitalization, which once you leave that cynical space and people are like, okay, what do we need to do moving forward? Number one that came to mind was language revitalization. People want to continue to learn and connect to the culture that these schools eliminated. Generations of people are seeing kids in traditional language immersion programs starting at Head Start, and they know the language better than their parents and grandparents. They want to see that continue to grow and they want to see some federal support that can also make that something that branches across the entire country. Um, there's also concern for mental health. This is opening up a significant amount of wounds for a lot of people who have been shamed into not talking about this or talk about it secretly or quietly, maybe privately even. We already know that our health systems are not the best in this country, and so if we're going to now open up this very tragic wound, people now want the tools to be able to help them process the trauma that is now being uncovered on top of already being an Indian experiencing trauma in many other ways. This is something that we were shamed into experiencing, something that was put onto us. But as Secretary Holland said, it didn't work. And now people are asking for any type of tools that can help us heal from it.
Exactly. And, one thing that this apology is definitely a promise to Indian country to further the commitment that the Biden Harris administration has made in advancing culture revitalization, language revitalization, and everything else. And so I think that's definitely something that people are carrying to the polls on election day. And so to kind of switch gears, Shaun, have you made a voting plan or have you voted early?
Yeah, and in fact, in our very first episode of the podcast, you can hear about my voting experience. I actually shared it with Levi Rickert, the publisher for Native News Online. We talked about early voting. Levi was one of the first people I met who voted. I think he might have voted on like the very first day available for him. I voted about 2 weeks ago in New Mexico. I voted in person. We have early voting in-person sites. I live in Albuquerque, so I'm an urban native. I vote in the urban settings. I don't have a tribal ballot. I have to actually vote separately in Laguna Pueblo because we do have tribal elections there. And I'm going to be doing that this weekend. But in terms of the congressional, state, local stuff, I did that. Took me 5 minutes. The stickers are all made by kids that were local made here in New Mexico, so they're a little fun. And then the poll workers, when they identify a first-time voter, they make an announcement, make a big show of it, and then lead a round of applause. And I saw 2 people who were like first-time voters just in that 10 minutes I was there voting. So there's a lot of excitement as we're seeing nationally, not just in New Mexico, which is going to be a solid blue state, but even in the swing states, early voting is a big thing. And Indian country is voting early too.
That sounds really exciting that they were applauding first-time voters. I know it's sometimes really hard to get people out there for the first time, especially those in my age demographic, 18 to 25, I believe, is like the lowest voter turnout. So have you been encouraging your friends and family to get out there and vote?
You know, I do share some of those old school principles of, let people make their own choice to vote in some ways. Just personally, I know that it's significant for me. I vote for the reasons why I vote for, which is to, participate in democracy, have my voice heard, while also understanding the significance of how my grandparents were born in New Mexico and were born without the right to vote. They had just become, they were citizens of the United States, but voting for Native Americans didn't exist in this state until the 40s. And so they were born in a world where they didn't even have that opportunity. So I think about them when I vote, but also that I understand the pain that the U.S. government causes for friends and family, not native and non-native particularly. And if they don't want to participate, I fully respect that because that's also an option we have here. But I do encourage people, if they can, to vote. And the way I do that is by providing them the most accurate information about when to register, who to vote. And if they have questions about what's on the ballot, I'm always happy to help them understand it as best as possible. So when people do want to vote, they make informed choices there, and then they can go confidently and cast their ballot. That's how I encourage people to vote.
Sound like a very, good friend helping people out.
I try. Yes, that's all we can do.
Marlon, I didn't know if you had any questions for Shaun.
Yeah, what is the makeup of the, kind of a general question, makeup of the area where you're at? Is it a lot of Mexican, Latino? What's the general population, and how is the native vote fit into that population?
Yeah, so because I don't really necessarily like the term, but it's a minority dominant state, meaning people of color are the majority in this state. White people are the minority demographically. We have Hispanics as the majority population, and Native Americans make up, according to census figures, which we know there's a bit of an undercount, about 11% of the overall population. There are 23 tribal governments that exist in New Mexico, 19 pueblos, 3 of which I'm part of, the Navajo Nation, which is one of the largest tribes in the country, and then we have 3 bands of Apaches, and they're across the entire region of this whole state. Plus, we have native groups that are really substantial when it comes to some energy exploration. New Mexico has 2 of the largest oil basins in the world, and some of that is on tribal land. So we do have natives that are involved not only in conservation efforts to protect and uphold environmental protections, but also some that are involved in the business side of extraction. That is, as they are allowed to, create businesses with their sovereignty treaty rights to be able to do so. New Mexico is the home for Deb Haaland. Both native and non-native people elected Secretary Haaland to Congress before she joined the administration. There are native people who are in all levels of government, not just tribal government. You have state elected officials, state senators. One of the major persons in New Mexico who we call our tax czar is a representative from Sandia Pueblo. Derek Lenty. And last year he reformed New Mexico's entire tax code. And so we have Native people doing work, not just for Native people and for tribal governments, but we're in the fabric of the entire community. And not only that, we have some major groups of people who are doing work with advocacy groups across the country. And a lot of it does start here in New Mexico. And so we are also in a lot of for many of us, in our ancestral homelands. And so that attachment, that tie also does lead us to have a really deep rooted sense of what our culture is, what our language is, where we're from. I can look outside from Albuquerque even and look at the Sandia Mountains, and that's a holy site for many Native people here. And so we're very prominent, I would say, so more so than other states. And the way that the election shakes out here, it does vote predominantly Democrat, and that's why we have a blue wall in New Mexico.
Right. Well, I wanted to thank you for all the work that you're doing, not only with the podcast, but also, in general, and with the election, and making sure that, Native voices are heard during this election. So thank you, Shaun, for joining us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So happy to be here.
So with that, we're going to quickly hear from our sponsors before we get into our next panel.
Chi-miigwech, and thank you to the MacArthur Foundation, 4 Directions, and the National Congress of American Indians for your support. This live stream would not be possible without you.
Mayuyum. 100 years ago, Native Americans born in the United States officially became U.S. citizens under the Snyder Act of 1924. So much has changed over the last century. But some things will never change. We've stood firm in our sovereignty and on our treaty rights, firm in our right to exist, and in our right to shape a better future.
Our Native vote could be the deciding factor this election. So know that your voice matters and your vote matters. The Native vote in both national and local elections has the power to shape policy, to defend tribal sovereignty, and to protect the next generation of Native leaders.
We have to gear up, show up, and go vote. We can honor our past and protect our future by our voices being heard.
The tenacity and persistence of our tribal nations and our Native peoples has remained steadfast to protect tribal sovereignty and continue pushing for the U.S. to uphold its trust and treaty obligations, all for our next generation. Be part of the legacy of the next 100 years of change for us.
For too long, stories about us were told by others. This election, be part of the story. Exercise your constitutional right to vote.
It's our right to be heard.
It's
your right to vote. For more information on registering to vote and other voting resources, visit nativevote.org.
Welcome back. Once again, we played that video on our last live stream. It's from NCAI, one of our partners who was making this live stream possible. But next, we're welcoming Margaret, the Associate Director of Advocacy and Engagement at Illuma Native, which is a Native women-led social justice organization dedicated to building power for Native peoples. You're a citizen of Chippewa Cree Nation, and welcome to Native News Online's Get Out the Vote live stream. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me, Neely. It's great to be here. I'm doing well. I'm actually calling from NCAI this year, which is being held in Las Vegas, Nevada, but I usually reside on Lenape-Hoking land in New York City.
Awesome. Well, welcome to our stream. Could you start by telling us a little bit about the work that Illuma Native is doing to get out the vote?
Absolutely. Yes. So the 2024 Natives Vote campaign is a continuation of our commitment to build power for Native peoples. We saw that in 2022 for the midterms, there was historic voter turnout and among Native peoples. And we want to know that that is still going to happen and that there also is more work to be done. So this year, we are expanding that aim by mobilizing more than 250,000 Native voters across key states. States, just like we've all talked about, that have the potential to determine outcomes in the elections. Our focus is not only to get folks to the polls, but also to get them engaged in the long term. So we are combining grassroots organizing, phone banking, digital outreach, and creative collaborations that will ensure that our communities are not only heard in 2024, but in every election moving forward. We've talked about all the kinds of barriers that Native people have faced trying to exercise our right to vote. Things like limited access to polling locations, restrictive voter ID laws, or even election resources not being in Native languages. So these are issues that often prevent our communities from voting and are issues that we are tackling head on through our website, nativesvote.com, to have accessible, culturally relevant resources that is available to everybody across the country. All you need is an internet access. So this year, most especially, we are strategizing to register 20,000 new Native voters in this multifaceted way. And we're also conducting voter registration trainings. We're organizing digital outreach efforts. And I am the host of our weekly SCO Volunteer Den phone and text banking session where we are contacting Native voters, especially low propensity voters, meaning folks who have participated in less than 3 out of the 5 of most recent elections across those key states where the Native vote can determine election outcomes, like Arizona, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. So we believe that the most effective way through all of this to mobilize the Native vote is through local organizing, because that's who knows our communities the best. It's not these national orgs, it's the folks that are actually in community. So that's why we are most especially partnered with Native Organizers Alliance to provide grassroots grants and funding and resources and all of the things to Native organizations across Alaska, Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, and Nevada. And these organizations are already deeply embedded in their communities, and they know best how to mobilize, strategize, and engage their communities as well.
I see Illuminative has been busy with the Get Out the Vote efforts. So could you tell the audience about some of the recent events that you guys have had?
Yes, of course. So on top of all of that high-level strategy that I was talking about, we are deeply and frivolently partnered with Native Organizers Alliance, and we are also working on collaborative and creative partnerships with organizations like the Center for Social and Media Impact's Good Laugh Project and Amplifier as well, so that we can help engage and create art and media and fun videos that are both culturally relevant, unique, and entertaining. Because what better way to engage our people than through the avenues that are most relevant to us, like humor or other forms of entertainment. So for example, most recently, we've produced over 100 pieces of Get Out the Vote comedy content, everything from TikTok videos to PSAs to bring in that humor, that Native humor, into the voting conversation. And with Amplifier, we are creating artwork that best reflects the values and identities of our Native peoples. So with all of this work on top of that grassroots organizing and the phone and text banking that we are doing, all of these strategies are going to help us reach new audiences, particularly young voters. Just like you said, 18 to 24, 25 is one of the lowest voter blocks that are participating in the elections. However, we are also the most numerous. If we can get the Native vote and the Native youth vote up, we have that power single-handedly to determine the elections. So we're trying to reinvigorate our youth through all of these strategies to participate and exercise our right to vote, which was not guaranteed to all of us, like we've talked about, for more than 50, 60 years.
Right. So like, I said, and like you said, young people, really struggle to get out and vote. And so what are some of the things that you're hearing from young people that would explain why that is.
Absolutely. I feel like there is definitely a lot of voter apathy that we are seeing among young voters, because how many times have you heard democracy is on the line, like your life depends on it, vote, it's the only thing you can ever do, it's the only solution there ever will be. I think that's a
Right.
load of baloney. It is a load of baloney. And I say this a lot to our organizers, because voting is not the most important thing that you can do. It is the least that you can do to help organize and create the conditions in which we organize. Voting is a tool. It is not the end all be all. It is a tool that we can use to help ensure that we have representatives holding positions in these offices who represent our values, who know that we exist as peoples, and to really listen to our communities and our needs, because oftentimes we as Native people, we are not fighting for issues only relevant to us. We are fighting for the rights of land, water, resources, all of our relatives, which impact us all. Like we saw this so many times throughout history. Standing Rock, at the No Dakota Access Pipeline, and we're going to be seeing it again, because impacts everything that impacts Native peoples impacts us all. So through our phone and text banking campaign, especially, we have been calling into those 5 states that I mentioned to try to encourage people to vote. And I've talked about referencing like your why factor. Oftentimes when Native peoples and young peoples have not participated in the electoral system, it's because there is not enough of education out there of how to do it. And you don't want to feel shame if you've never voted before. Just like that, like Shaun mentioned earlier, with the celebrations of first-time voters, that is something that we want to make sure is known to folks that you are calling. Voting, it's your right, but it's also the least that you can do to help create the conditions in which we all organize, the conditions that we see in our communities in every level of office. And I also talk about like the why factor. When you're encouraging your relative or your friend to vote, talk about why you do it specifically, because Illuminative's narrative change research has shown that the most effective way to change hearts and minds, to move and persuade people and to have them join your movement, is to tell stories. Stories are specific and specific to you. They take you on a journey of where you are to where you are going to be. So I often talk about my story of why I'm voting in this election. And that's because my rights as a woman, as a menstruating woman, are on the ballot across every office, federal, local, state, and I'm a citizen of a federally recognized tribe. So tribal sovereignty is also at the forefront of my concerns, because it was just last year that we saw ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, being attacked at the level of the Supreme Court. And I often ask folks that I'm talking to on the phone, I ask them a question to help get those gears turning. And I say, have you ever thought about how the representatives in office, if we had a say in who could be in those seats, they would best represent our values and our issues that impact our communities, so that they would be better informed to ensure that tribal sovereignty is upheld, or that our water rights are respected. And then
Right.
oftentimes you get met with, no, I haven't thought about it like that. I haven't thought about how voting is a tool rather than an end-all be-all solution. So I think shifting the perception of voting through that lens has helped not only me, but other young folks be encouraged to vote, especially this cycle.
Yeah, I think it is very hard to still have hope or faith in the democratic process. I think that's something I've been seeing a lot on social media, is just this idea that why are we even participating in a system that is so broken and so colonial and oppresses so many people systemically and institutionally. But like you said, it's, for me, something that has helped me get out of that kind of apathetic mindset is I'm not just voting for myself, I'm voting for other people. I'm voting for those who can't, I'm voting for, 7 generations in the future, right? I'm from Michigan, and in Michigan, we have protections for abortion access. And so I know that me personally, and any other women in Michigan, may not have to struggle with that. But there's other women who live in deep red states that unfortunately don't have the same opportunities. And it's reasons like that I voted. And I think that's really important and really special that you guys are using why you guys voted as a way to kind of reach other voters who may still be on the fence as to whether or not they want to vote. But I wanted to ask how your phone banking is going.
Yeah, absolutely. The phone banking has been very good and very successful. However, there's one important thing to note. For every campaign out there, they access the VAN, the Voter Action Network, to try to get and call and contact previous voters, unregistered folks, blah, blah, blah. And there exists a VAN for every demographic but Native people.
Okay.
Now, through our phone and text banking campaigns, we are not only reaching Native folks or trying to reach Native folks, but we are defining this data, because the best data that we have is not data that points directly to our relatives. So oftentimes we're calling folks and we're asking them, hey, or we're saying like, hi, my name is Margaret. I'm a citizen of the Chippewa Cree tribe, and I'm trying to reach Native voters like you. Are you Native American? And one out of 2 times, they're likely not. And that's because there is no Native American ban. There is no Native American Voter Action Network. So this campaign has been defining and combing and massaging that data so that we can have those lists in the future to best mobilize our people. And outside of that, we've sent more than 350,000 text messages, all with those culturally fun and relevant memes. And even one of this is like, you want this fry bread and Pepsi, you're going to have to, it's only for a Native with a voting plan. Like fun stuff like that, that'll encourage folks to engage and respond to us. And then for calling, we've been calling across 5 key states where that Native vote can determine the outcome of elections. And maybe not everybody has been Native, but we still have been able to reach our relatives. And when they are Native, that's when they'll actually have a conversation with us on the phone. Because when they're not, they're just like, yeah, I'm American. I'm like, great. How about Native American? Because there still exists so much lack of representation and understanding that Native peoples are still alive and here and resilient and strong and amazing and all of the things today. So
Right.
It's been great.
I can see how that would be a little bit hard to navigate, especially when you're not sure who you're calling. I previously have worked on a campaign, so I do have some experience with phone banking, and it can be a little bit scary. But I'm glad that Illuminative is really finding ways to kind of basically pioneer a new path when it comes to reaching out to Native voters. So how do you hope your message today that you've been sharing with all of us will resonate with Native people as they consider their role in the upcoming election?
Well, as we've talked about already, voting is a tool, and we have to see it like a tool that we can use to create the conditions in which we organize and operate and live and thrive within our communities. It helps get representatives in office that represent the values and the needs of our communities. We vote, just like you said, not just for the individual, we vote for our whole communities, for our relatives, past, present, and future. And the best organizing happens at that grassroots level. So that is where the expertise is always held. We look to our communities and our grassroots organizers for how to best make it so that their needs are heard. And that's definitely something that this campaign has proven true through and through. With Illuminative and Native Organizers Alliance, we've seen that the Native vote is going to be the deciding factor in this election. And we want everyone to get out the vote. We're not saying to whom or to where or to what you should vote for. We just want that vote count, because it hasn't even been that long since we've had the right to do so. And we're still seeing all of those barriers to exercising that right.
Right.
And they want to be trying so hard to limit the Native vote if it didn't matter?
That's what I always say. That is so. I always say that. I always ask, would they really be trying so hard to suppress our vote if it didn't mean anything?
Mhm.
So I'm glad that you guys are doing such great work to get out the Native vote. And it seems like also just other votes in general when you end up calling those who may not be Native. So I wanted to say miigwech for joining us today, and miigwech for the work that you and Illuminative are doing in partnership with Native Organizers Alliance, etc. So I want to let you know that we appreciate the work you're doing, and good luck out there getting out the Native vote.
Thank you so much for having me, and best of luck to you all too.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. And for our next panel, we'll hear from Anne Egan-Waukau, and she is an enrolled member of the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin. She's the urban Wisconsin Native Vote organizer at the Wisconsin Conservation Voices. Anne fosters relationships with Indigenous relatives and organizations in Milwaukee, Madison, and the Menominee and Ho-Chunk Nation through respect, humility, honesty, and humor. So, Anne, great to have you joining us on the live stream today.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you for having us here.
Yeah, and would you care to give a introduction of yourself beyond what I've shared?
Sure, yeah. I'm the daughter of Hillary and Edith. Hillary Sparky-Waukau from the Menominee Reservation, born and raised. My father was an environmental warrior, which got me to continue my work through voting, because voting is what matters to our people, and making sure we elect people who will protect Mother Earth, who will protect our health services, who will protect our culture and our sovereignty. So what I do for Native Vote is getting our people to the polls, and I couldn't ask for a better job because it's so purposeful, and it's such a wonderful feeling to talk to people who realize the importance. Some may not when we first talk to them, but by the time we're done, they get it.
Yeah, and Anne, you have a really interesting story about one of your occasions where you went to vote. Would you share that with us?
Absolutely. Well, when I went to vote, I had moved into a suburb in Milwaukee. This was 20 years ago. And I went to the polls, and the woman was an elderly woman asking a lot of questions, and, date of birth, where your address is, where do you live? And then she said, where were you born? I said, I was born on the Menominee Reservation. She said, that's Indian. Are you Indian? I said, yes, I am. I was very proud of that. And she said, you can't vote. Emphatically. And I said, ma'am, I can vote. I'm from Menominee Reservation, which is a county, but also it's in Wisconsin. I can vote. No, Indians do not vote. You can't vote. So I told her I voted before, and she just gasped. You voted before? And I said, yes, ma'am, I have. I'm going to again. And she ended up going to the head of the poll. I could tell there were some words exchanged, and she came back and she said, ma'am, I wasn't being racist. I was following policy, and I got to vote. I made sure that I was not going to leave until I vote. But I tell that story to our people because some people would walk away, and we have to let them know you have to vote. Your vote matters. It counts, and you have that right as a Native American to vote since the Citizen Act was passed 100 years ago. So we do have that right to vote, and we need to use it.
Okay, and you're doing a lot of the work, the grassroots work on the ground. So where have you been? What have you been up to these last few weeks?
Well, these last few weeks, we went to Wangshik, which is the Native American student organization in Madison, UW-Madison. They had a powwow, and we registered a lot of first-time voters. That was exciting. And then we also went to Mole Lake to register. That we were, at this point, registration was over, so we basically are encouraging people to vote and see what their vote plan is. But what's cool was that one woman I talked to said that she'd gone to our baseball tailgate that we had hosted in August 15th, and a donor gave us 1,000 tickets and sent them out to all the tribes. So kids who'd never gotten to a game got to go. And we had Smoky Town there, and then we had a color guard, and then they all went onto the field and they performed a flag song, and the color guard was there. And people were so amazed that the power that they felt. Even the players were at attention. And it was just a wonderful feeling because it's all about voting, and we all have to vote, not just the natives. Everybody has to vote, and every vote counts. So to hear this woman say that she was there and describe to me how she felt, that was a great feeling. So that happened, and we're going everywhere we can. I was at the Indian Council of the Elderly last weekend. We were tabling at the Bucks to register people at a Bucks game a couple weeks ago before the October 16th deadline. We've been to a variety of events. I went to the Indian Community School Parent Teacher Conference. So if that gives you an idea of what we're doing, we go everywhere. I'm everywhere I can be. And of course, the Hunting Moon Powwow, which was last weekend, the weekend before last. And that was just a wonderful event. At that point, we couldn't register, but we could tell people, you need to go to vote. This is important. Give them all the information they needed and what they could take with them. So we had captured names and addresses, and then we'll send them reminders about voting. So we've been working hard, and this goes on all year long, not just.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Great. We do hear some stories about intimidation at the polls. Have you run into any of that with some of the voters that you've encountered during all these visits?
Personally, I can say that on one reservation, a woman had registered, and she's a very faithful voter, and they tried to tell her she wasn't registered, and she didn't like that. She goes, I'm registered, find it. I know I'm registered. Nope, you're not registered. And so they said the same to her grandson. So we got NARF involved with that. And after the investigation was done, the clerk was told to issue an apology in the media to that person who in fact was registered. She did vote. She was not going to vote by any means, let anything stop her. Intimidation, I know that in Milwaukee, my colleague, really good friend, told me that there was an incident where people were messing with an elderly woman who was standing in line, quite hot line, and some guys were harassing her. So they got a phone call from one of the offices, and these big guys went over to sit with her, and they left her alone after that. So if we're going to have our ears to the ground to listen. If there are any problems, we'll find out about them. Call it the native grapevine, right?
Right. And then also some of the issues with presenting your tribal ID at the polls. That seems to be an issue as well.
Well, most clerks are pretty good about it. I went back to the clerk where she told me I couldn't vote because I was native, and I gave her my tribal ID. No problem. She said, we're different now. But in one reservation, a county clerk was saying that tribal IDs were not to be able to use for voting. And that is so incorrect. So she had to be educated, and we're watching it closely. So like I said, we've got Native American Rights Fund. We've got attorneys who are on standby. We're at polls, and not only on the reservations. Like I said, I'm volunteering in Milwaukee. So hopefully I'll get sent to an area where there are Native voters, because if there's anything going on, we'll be there. And our people, I sense that people are going to be coming out in droves for the vote this year. They realize how important it is for Mother Earth and for our culture and our sovereignty and our wild rice, the future of that and the future of our kids.
Right. So how do you hope your message today will resonate with Native people as they consider their role in the 2024 presidential election?
Well, since we're 501c3, we don't take candidates, but we don't talk about candidates. But what I do say is vote for Mother Earth, vote for the seventh generation, vote for our sovereignty. Those are the main issues that we all face and are very important to us.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Okay, so a lot of good work being done. How are you feeling about the work that you're doing? How do you feel about Election Day, and how do you feel about the early voting initiatives happening? Is it
Well,
working?
I think the early voting is going on. It definitely is going on, especially in Milwaukee. I've heard it's doing quite well. But also, I feel that people understand what's going on, and I think we're going to have a good turnout. I think we'll have a good turnout because every vote matters. Every single vote matters. And our work, we've been doing a lot of work nonstop all year long. We've pushed up now. Right now, I'm on my way up to your reservation to do some get out the vote cards. And I'm kind of
Great,
late.
great.
But yeah, so the tribes, we've been working with all the tribes. We've got a total of 4 organizers. We have Gloria McGeeshik in Bad River, Stacy White in Potawatomi area, Maria Haskins in Menominee. So we have people in various parts of the state. Everyone's working really hard. We're canvassing, we're helping each other out. Whatever needs to be done gets done. And if there's a surprise, we work with it. We just go for
Well,
it.
Anne, it's really great that you carved out a little bit of your time. I know you're busy and on the road. Any closing thoughts or messages that you want to share with the viewers?
I just tell everybody, go vote then.
All right. All right.
Thank you,
And I
Norm.
appreciate it. Yeah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sharice Davids. I represent Kansas's 3rd District in Congress. I'm Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin and was elected as one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress. You know, for centuries, Native people have been left out of the political process, but we have a deep history of resilience, of standing up for our rights and looking out for our communities. And voting is one way to continue that legacy. It's how we make sure that our voices, our values, and our visions for the future are heard. I know that voting can feel distant from the day-to-day challenges that folks are facing, but the truth is that every time we show up to the ballot box, we are deciding how resources are going to be allocated to our schools, our healthcare system, to our land management and our environmental management. You know, we're choosing leaders who make decisions on things like tribal sovereignty, on natural resources, and investments in rural areas where many of our communities are living and thriving. It's the power of every vote combined that truly makes the difference. Leaders pay attention to frankly, leaders pay attention to when they see turnout in Native communities, and they respond when they see our unity. We've seen it in past elections where a small number of votes that are cast can make a huge difference in the outcomes, a difference in like policy decisions that directly impact Native communities. So when we vote, our values and our voices are brought into those spaces where the decisions are actually being made. So this election, let's make sure that our voices are loud and clear. Make a plan to vote. Bring your aunties, bring your cousins, your siblings, friends, everyone. Walk into that room. Cousin, let's go vote. Never forget, your voices are essential to our country's future. I'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you to Representative Sharice Davids for her video message. And I want to thank each of you, the viewers, for making some time to watch our live stream here as we go into this final week towards Election Day. So like Anne was just saying earlier, you know, get out there, cast your ballot for who you see that is will help the Native causes, the environmental, protecting our sacred rights. It's really important that you get out there and cast your ballot. So thank you for your time, and miigwech and pinagigi to each one. Thank you for being with us here tonight.
This stream is produced by Native News Online with funding support from the MacArthur Foundation, the National Congress of American Indians, and 4 Directions. Miigwech for your support.